Good morning, everyone. I'm Lance Barron, President of Sisters in Crime Atlanta for the remainder of this year. And we are excited to have all of you here for Off the Shelf, where our own Dawn Gepfer interviews an author. And we're excited about our author today. It's Darryl Bollinger, and he will be talking about his path to writing and his books. This is a monthly Zoom-only program that the chapter presents to get readers to take books off the shelf and read them. And our guest today is Darryl Bollinger, lives in Western North Carolina after spending 28 years in the healthcare industry, has a master's degree in healthcare administration from Trinity University. His novels are all medical thrillers, and they've won numerous awards. His latest, The Treatment Plan, was released in November last year, and it goes back to South Florida, where 6 of his novels are set. His books, The Healing Tree and The Cure, are set in the mountains of Western North Carolina. And so, Darryl, we're very excited to have you here and look forward to learning from you about your writer's path and your books. And Dawn, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this Saturday. As Lance said, we are excited to have author Darryl Bollinger with us. Hi, Darryl. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're thrilled to have you and learn more about your medical thrillers. They sound fascinating. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. This is an interactive program. We love for the audience to join in, to ask questions. Feel free to speak up or raise your hand, and we will call on you. Or if you're not comfortable asking directly, you can put your question in the chat and one of us will ask it for you. So please do engage in this conversation. So let's get started. Darryl, I always like to start off these conversations by getting to know our author beyond their book jacket. And so I'm going to ask you to tell us about yourself, but I want you to go way back. I want you to go back to the beginning and kind of give us your life timeline, because from what I've read, it's a pretty interesting pathway. So.
Well, great. I first of all, let me give a shout out to Todd Hutchings, literally a childhood friend. So some of this will be familiar to him. Glad to see you, Todd, and glad you could make it. I grew up in Macon, Georgia, in the center of the state, and I tell people, as Todd would certainly knows, it was a decidedly middle-class neighborhood and a decidedly middle-class family. And I always loved reading and writing. At a very young age, it was a means for escape for me, quite honestly, because I've since been fortunate enough to travel extensively and see lots of places and go lots of places and do things that I never thought I'd ever have a chance to see growing up in Macon. So reading was an escape for me, and I remember have fond memories of reading and the old things I call bookmobiles, if any of you remember those. I remember that and love going to the library, and was fortunate enough to have some great teachers along the way and high school that encouraged reading and writing and introduced me to writers, and grew up on Mark Twain was one of my favorite writers. And the thing I liked about Samuel Clemens was I felt like I was on the raft in the Mississippi River with Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. I mean, he put you into place, and it was an escape. I mean, I would just get lost in the story, and I always admired that. And and grew up reading Mark Twain, of course, and older reading Hemingway and Joseph Heller, Catch-22, which I have on my bookshelf. Steinbeck, Harper Lee. I mean, all the classics. One of the more contemporary classic writers that I think is a classic is John Updike. I had an opportunity to meet him at one point in Tallahassee. And to me, again, he was a writer's writer. He wrote short stories, he wrote children's stories, he wrote nonfiction, he wrote fiction, he wrote poetry. I mean, he could write anything, and I just always admired that. So I grew up reading a lot, and always had it in the back of my mind that I wanted to write, like a lot of writers wanted to write the great American novel, and I always dreamed of that. Uh, and I loved authors that could, as I said earlier, transport me into another place and time and make you feel the presence there. And I've always loved that. So I always wanted to write a fiction novel. Never, to me, I respect people that write nonfiction. In fact, I was at a book signing a few years ago, and I was sitting next to an author that I did not know. He wrote nonfiction, and of course, I write fiction. And we were both kind of looking at each other's books, and finally he said, Darryl, he said, I just don't know how you do it. You have to make up all this stuff. And I looked at him, I said, I don't know how you do it because you have to keep all your facts straight. And that's the way I love being able to have the latitude and the freedom of fiction. And writing to me a fiction novel was, and it still is, and I think that's why, as you can tell, I have a passion for it, is magic. I mean, to take a literally and figuratively a blank sheet of paper and create a setting and characters and a story is just, it's magic to me. And a well-written book is still magical to me, how somebody can make you feel and make you experience another place and time and characters. And so I feel like I've always been a writer at heart, but I never had the confidence growing up that I could make a living at it. As you know, writing is, most of us don't do it to get rich. But so I never had the confidence that I could make a living at it. And so when I went to college, I majored in accounting, which is as far away from writing as you can get. But I knew I could get a job in accounting, and I like to eat, and I like to have a roof over my head, and so. But I wrote on the side. I started my first novel. And if I'm rambling, please feel free to interrupt me. But I started my first novel probably, oh gosh, in the late 70s, after I got out of college and started working. I took one creative writing class in college, loved it, and was very encouraged by my instructor. And so I started writing a novel, and I tell people I was a closet writer. I was working full time, but I would write on the side, as I had a chance. And I tell people it took me 22 years to finish my first novel. I'm doing it that way. I finally finished it, and I'm skipping over my boring career and skipped over that. And then I finally finished when we moved to Tallahassee. I finished that first novel, and I was so excited. It's like, oh gosh, I've got it. I've got the great American novel. And met with an agent who was very. I still value the meeting with her. She was a New York literary agent, and she read. In fact, I had a 15-minute window to talk with her at a meeting we had in Tallahassee. And she spent 30 minutes with me, which I was pleased with. And she told me, she said, Darryl, she said, I like your premise. You've got a good premise. She said, but it's not ready for prime time. And she pointed out why she thought that. And so I left and was kind of dejected. It's like I finished my first novel, and and this person is telling me it's not ready for prime time. And it's like, God, I was kind of bummed out. And the more I thought about it, the more I agreed with 100% of what she said. It was not ready for prime time. But she had some very good constructive criticism that I took to heart. And so anyway, I put that novel in my file cabinet where it sits to this day. It has never seen the light of day, probably won't. And that's not unusual when you talk to other writers. Michael Connelly is one of my favorite contemporary writers. As Todd knows, we're both Michael Connelly fans. And I was fortunate enough to meet him and hear him speak a few years ago. And he's got 2 or 3 novels that are in his file cabinet that will never see the light of day. So I put that one in the file cabinet and started working on The Medicine Game, which was my first published novel. I worked on that, finished that, and then I had a decision to make. Do I want to go the traditional route and go with a traditional publisher, or do I want to go the self-publishing route? And I looked at it and talked to some other writers that I knew, and came to the conclusion that at that point in the game, to get an agent, it may take a couple of years to get an agent, a literary agent. And of course, all the traditional publishers no longer take unsolicited, even then, no longer took unsolicited manuscripts at all. So you have to have an agent. Well, there's a couple of years to get an agent. Then it takes an agent a couple of years to sell it to one of the big publishing houses. And again, this is a traditional path, and it's, you have people that, have a lightning strike and sell it their first novel and blah, blah, blah. But for the most part, it takes an agent a couple of years to sell it to a publishing house. And then it takes usually another year or 2 before it actually is in print if they decide to publish it. So I'm looking at it going, well, that's 6 years. Do I want to spend 6 years getting my first novel published? And self-publishing was kind of in its infancy then, and I feel like I've kind of grown up with self-publishing, but I decided I would rather go the self-publishing route. And it was not that there's anything wrong with either or right with either one. It was just the best decision for me in my situation and where I was age-wise. I wanted to go ahead and get something out there, and I felt like I would have more control over the process if I self-published. But I wanted to do it. I always felt like my competition was the Michael Connollys of the world. And I say that with the greatest respect for Michael Connelly. He's an incredible writer. But I want my books to compare favorably with his. And so I would literally go to, the bookstore and sit down on the thriller aisle and pull out his books and look at them. And I had a notebook and I had a ruler, and I'm sure the manager of it was a Border store at the time, was not real happy about me taking up space, and but I would measure the margins, the fonts they used, and would look at the contemporary thriller writers, and I wanted my book to measure up to theirs. I hired a professional cover artist to do all of my covers. I still use the same person that did my first cover. I hired a professional editor, and it makes me crazy when I hear people, and I hope I don't offend anybody here, but it makes me crazy when people say, well, my neighbor is a high school English teacher and they can edit it for me. It's like, no. Editing is a very, very highly specialized skill, and have a lot of respect for professional editors. And I hire professional editors to edit all of my books. So again, I want it to compare favorably with the Michael Connollys and David Baldacci's of the world. And so that was the path that I chose. And I'm happy with that path. I'm currently working on my 9th book. And I've been happy with it. And I think, and I've had, at times people approach me about, well, do you want to consider going to traditional publishing and go to that direction? And I have thought about it and considered it. And And I'm happy with this. Again, I like having the control over it. And traditional publishing has changed a lot too over the 10 plus years I've been doing it. I know I have friends that have signed traditional publishing contracts, but they don't offer quite as much as they once did to new authors, especially. They spend their advertising and marketing dollars on, I call them the rock stars. Again, the Michael Connollys, the John Grishams, they spend their advertising dollars on that. And I had a friend that signed a contract a few years ago with Simon and Schuster. Um, and the first question they asked her, I said, well, how are you going to market your book?
Mhm.
And it's like, well, I thought, because I have it's like, no, how are you going to market your book? Do you have a website? Do you have social, tell us what you're doing social media wise. So if you're going to do all that anyway, I would rather, again, have control over the process. It's a little more in terms of margins and on the financial side, it is better. But again, it just worked for me. So that's the reason I went that way. So, you know, with that is kind of an introduction on how I got into writing. And as you say, I loved your comment, Dawn, about going outside the covers, and that's how I ended up writing. I love it. I give my wife a lot of credit when I kind of retired from the 9 to 5 routine. She That was when I was still had not finished my first book, and she said, "Well, you've always wanted to write." She says, "Nothing's stopping you now. You don't have to go into the office every day." So she challenged me, and I didn't have an excuse, and that's when I finished that book and embarked on my full-time career. So I love it, still love writing. I still think it's a magical process. Love talking to other writers and readers. Um, as you can tell, I can go on for forever on the subject of writing, and I feel like I'm always learning. I had a call yesterday with a local writer who wanted to talk with me. She had been given my name and number by a local independent bookstore. Shout out to Blue Ridge Books. They've been very, very good to me, and I certainly try to promote them when I can. Anyway, this writer called me, and we had a nice conversation talking about writing and so forth. And as I told her, I feel like and I am a lifelong learner. Every time I meet with other writers and readers, I learn more about how to improve the craft of writing. And I really don't feel like, I think it's a journey. It's not a destination. I don't never feel like I'm there. Um, and I hope I don't ever feel that way, because I enjoy learning, and hopefully every book gets a little bit better. And that's my goal, is to continually improve and learn from my mistakes. And sometimes I go back and look at the medicine game, and I'm like, oh my God. But I'm proud of it. But again, I've learned so much since I wrote that book, and hope I feel that way about every book I write.
So you mentioned the medicine game, and to date you have published 8 books. You've got a 9th in the hopper. All of these books are medical thrillers. Okay, so we know you got a degree in accounting, but somewhere along the way you went back to school and you got a master's in healthcare administration. What And that's where this medical thriller, comes from. So tell us what was happening in your life that led you to go back to school, and in particular to study healthcare administration.
Good question, and it's a practical thing. I fell into healthcare, literally. I graduated my undergraduate degrees in accounting, started working in accounting, and realized fairly quickly that accounting was not me. I won't say I hated it, but I was not real happy doing accounting. And it's funny because my wife is a CPA, so but accounting was just not my thing. And it's like, okay, I was working for a small CPA firm at the time. And a friend of mine, I was not happy. And anyway, the CPA firm was cutting back. It was a small firm. They were cutting back staff. So I basically was the last hired, first fired, which is the way it goes. So I was looking for a job. And a friend of mine was working for a healthcare company based, it's no longer in business, but it was a healthcare company based in Macon. I was not living in Macon at the time. And he got me an interview with this healthcare company. So I was looking for a job. And the job was in accounting, but it was in for a healthcare company that was a very young, small healthcare company at the time. And I was fortunate enough to get a job with them. So I moved back to Macon and got into healthcare, working on the finance side and accounting side. And liked it. It was a fascinating industry. This company was growing like crazy and adding hospitals all over the world, actually, and all over the country, and got into healthcare. And they had a program where I could go back to graduate school and they'd pay for it. And so I decided to get a master's degree in healthcare administration. The price was right. Had no real intention of staying in accounting any longer than I had to, but it was a means to an end. It was a job, a good job. Company treated me well, and that was where I got to travel and see things and do things. I mean, I traveled to Europe. They had hospitals all over the country, hospitals in Europe. I got to do international travel. And got to do things and see things that I never thought I'd get to do. So I learned a lot from that experience, and stay. I never obviously do not have a clinical background, so never got involved on the clinical side of things. And then went to work for a large not-for-profit hospital chain based in Fort Myers. And got to experience that side of the business, and loved health, and still do love healthcare. It's just because it touches all of us at some point in our lives, either personally or with your family. And the thing I liked about writing medical thrillers, and what attracted me to that, is I always like Michael Crichton is one of my favorite authors, and I love the way he would take a kernel of truth and wrap this incredible story around it, like the
Yeah.
Jurassic Park. I mean, they did find dinosaur DNA in amber. That part's true, and he creates this incredible story around, but he's educating you at the same time. And I've always loved that model, and I try to do that in my books, is to teach people, teach readers without knowing it about healthcare, because it's an incredibly complicated uh, field, as we all know. And June, my wife, and I, marvel, because she was in healthcare too on the finance side, and we spent our whole careers in it, and still I'm stumped by some of the complexity of it, and people that don't understand it, and we understand it. We spent our careers in it, and it's still hard for us to, because a lot of it just doesn't make sense. So I try to educate, like the care card, where the insurance number determines what kind of care you get. Well, that's real life. And people say, well, is that true? Does your insurance number on your card determine? And it's like, I tell people, well, I write fiction and I stick to that, but absolutely it's based on that. We all know the level of care you get is based on the kind of insurance you have and the kind of financial means you have. And so I try to educate people about that without preaching to them, or trying to teach them something with lecture them, so to speak. So I want to educate people as well. So that's in a short version of how I ended up in healthcare and why I write medical thrillers. And the other thing about medical thrillers, I tell people, I won't live long. People say, where do you get your stories from? And in healthcare, trust me, I will not live long enough. If I live to be 110, I won't live long enough to write all the stories that I've accumulated over the years. It's just such a fertile field that, again, affects everybody. Everybody can relate to it. And so I've got plenty of material. So anyway.
So from what I can gather from your books, they seem to kind of be like a topic in healthcare, something that's challenging for the average Joe. And so yeah, you probably do have a lot of individual stories, but these topics are fascinating. And in particular, I want to read something that someone wrote in reviewing your novel Treatment Plan. She wrote, gripping because the story is expertly crafted to grab you by the neck and not let go. Horrifying because the very people who should be helping drug-addicted patients are instead motivated to make sure they stay addicted. Important, because even though Treatment Plan by Darryl Bollinger is fictional, similar events are happening to real families. Yes, Treatment Plan is a gripping, horrifying, important page-turner that deserves a wide audience. So when I read that, I became very curious about all of your books and what they relate to. And so understanding this has been a progressive build to get you to the Treatment Plan, which is your 8th published novel. Did you start out, let's go back to the medicine game. When you wrote the medicine game, were you already said you like to educate, but were you writing just something because something sparked and you were interested in writing it? Or were you trying to really share with us something that happens in the medical field that we should be aware of?
Great question. And
I took a long way to get there. I apologize.
no, that's fine. It's a great question. And the answer, Dawn, is both. I do start out with, I call it a theme in mind with my stories. And what triggers that theme, and I can tell you that with Treatment Plan, a great example, and what an awesome review. I was just, man, I'm flattered with a review like that, because that's what I want to try to accomplish. But the genesis for Treatment Plan was an NPR article that I read the transcript of years ago about the Delray Beach Fire and Rescue Squad being called out to a, excuse me, called out for exactly what happened in the story. A person was pushed out of a car in a residential area in Delray Beach. And an NPR reporter got wind of this and reported on the story. And I think I put the link in the back of the book to that story. And they basically told the reporter that this happens on a weekly basis in Delray Beach. And that just struck me and just reached out and grabbed me. It's just so horrific, and it's immoral, it's unethical, it's horrible on every level. And I knew when I read that story, that was my book. That was what drove me to do the Treatment Plan. So it's a combination of both. I have a theme in mind. But the inspiration for it and the thing that kind of pushes me over the edge, so to speak, can be something like reading that article, and that it just reaches out and grabs me. And I have, in a way, I come up with story ideas. I have a literal folder, and a folder on my computer. I have probably a dozen folders for medical thriller story ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And so I accumulate, I see articles or I read interviews or things, I put, file those away, and eventually something will rise to the top and become the story for the next book. But sometimes, like the Healing Tree, an interesting story on that one, I was working on treatment plan. I was halfway through with the first draft of treatment plan when I went for a hike with a good friend and neighbor of mine. We were hiking in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, which is less than a mile from the window here. We were hiking, and it was just the two of us, and we're hiking in this trail, and there was nobody out there in the middle of the mountains. And Chuck said, and he's in front of me, and he says, "Oh, Darryl," I says, "I've got this great idea for a book." And when you're a writer, you hear that frequently. And so I kind of rolled my eyes. Fortunately, he couldn't see me because I was behind him, but I rolled my eyes and go, "Okay, here we go," and he said, imagine, he said, like that tree over there. He said, "You know what kind of tree that is?" I said, "I have no clue. I mean, I know some of the trees up here." And he said, "Can you imagine hiking out here and seeing a tree that everybody thought was extinct, and it had these healing properties?" And I thought, oh my God. And so we started bouncing back and forth talking about it. And by the end of the hike, I literally had the story fleshed out of the healing tree, and went home and put treatment plan on the shelf and started working on the healing tree. So that was totally something that just interrupted what I was working on and just reached out and grabbed me, and that became the healing tree. And again, it had a basis in reality. Taxol, which is one of the most successful and cancer fighting drugs ever invented, was based on a plant called the Pacific yew, YEW. And it was discovered in, I just did a talk to a book club here about the healing tree, and Taxol was discovered by a botanist. Well, the plant was discovered. He was working under contract for the FDA and also for the Department of Agriculture, and he was out west gathering plant samples. Had no idea why he picked this tree. His name was Arthur Barclay. He was a botanist that was hired by the Department of Agriculture. And he picked this particular plant and instructed his crew he had with him to get samples of it. And they submitted these samples to researchers back in Research Triangle Park in North Carolina. This took like 20 years for him to find out that it had cancer fighting properties. And that was the beginning of Taxol. So again, there's so much out there that we don't know about, like this plant. I mean, this plant was an unremarkable tree. Loggers didn't like it because it didn't make good lumber. Nobody thought it had any value. And he happened to collect samples from this tree, and come to find out it was the basis for one of the most successful cancer drugs ever. And what a story. So that, again, I knew that story having been in healthcare and having lived in Tallahassee, because I'll put in a plug for Florida State University. They have gotten hundreds of millions of dollars in royalties off Taxol because one of their professors was the one that figured out how to synthesize it. And which made it just a huge commercial hit. And so living in Tallahassee and being in the medical field, I was familiar with Taxol and the whole story. So it was just a natural, fit to write that story. So again, a long-winded answer, but
No, that's great. And that kind of like it helps us understand like how things are coming to you and then how you're fitting them together. So I do know, I was surprised by this because I was trying to put the timeline of your books in order of publication. And what I discovered is you have a series, Jack and Molly. You have 3 books in that series, but you didn't publish them sequentially. There are books in between. So let's go to The Medicine Game, which was the first one, the first Jack and Molly. And when you wrote that, were you planning on writing a series?
No. Again, a good question, and the story behind that is no, I had no intention of that being a series. I wrote the book, then published the next one, which was A Case of Revenge, I believe, was my second one, which did not have the same characters, different setting, everything. And I was getting really good feedback on Medicine Game. I was fortunate enough to win a couple of awards for that one. And people wanted to know more about Jack and Molly. And so that was totally just again taking feedback from readers, and so I was like, well, okay, I can do another story on Jack and Molly, and again had a theme in mind in terms of the prescription drug abuse, which was so prevalent in Florida at the time, still is, but even more so back then. So it was an easy, kind of an easy fit, and I thought, well, how hard can it be to write a sequel? Well, let me tell you, it's not as easy as you would think, and the writers out there know what I'm talking about, because I'm thinking, oh yeah, it's easy. You already got, characters. You don't have to, introduce them, develop them, blah, blah, blah. The problem with it is it becomes more like writing nonfiction. You have to keep your facts and your timelines straight, because trust me, readers will call you out on things. And so writing a sequel, I found out by experience, it was a lot tougher than I thought it was going to be when I got into writing The Pill Game, which was the sequel to The Medicine Game. But yeah, it did not start out to write a sequel. And again, another Michael Connelly story that Michael shared with us is Harry Bosch never started out to be a series.
Wow.
He wrote the first story, and kind of the same thing. It was successful. People liked it, and so it's like, well, okay, I'll write another one. John Updike, the Rabbit series, the 4 books. Rabbit runs, Rabbit redux, Rabbit is rich, and those never start. And I heard that directly from John Updike's mouth. He never meant for that to be a sequel. And again, the feedback on it, and he thought, well, what a great idea to revisit Rabbit Angstrom in 10 years. And so that was the second book. And then 10 years later came the third. So a lot of times, again, you take the input and the feedback you get and what your instinct is telling you, and you roll with it. And so that's how Jack and Molly ended up being a 3-book series.
So you stopped at your 5th book was their 3rd book. They're the 3rd in the series. Did you stop that because of what the challenges that you just told us about? What do they call it? A series Bible that you end up having to keep, where you're tracking all the data that you're putting in your story to make sure it stays consistent. So
I don't, the truth of the matter, Dawn, is I was kind of tired of Jack and Molly.
the readers may like them, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. My heart wasn't in it. I felt like they had kind of run their course, and I didn't have the passion for doing another Jack and Molly book. I will tell you that, not to digress, but the book I'm working on now is going to be, in essence, a sequel. Not a sequel. I don't call it a sequel. It's going to be a series using some of the same characters as the care card. Warren Thompson, my protagonist in the care card, is going to be in the new book that I'm working on. And again, that was based on, I didn't start out for it being a sequel or writing another book about Warren Thompson, but I got such good feedback from my readers that like Warren Thompson and his love interest, Micah. And so the book I'm working on now is featuring them. And I like Warren. I mean, some of it, again, like I said, I was tired of Jack and Molly. But Warren I like, and I want to do another one about him. Whether I'll do another book, I can't tell you right now, but probably depends on how well this one does. But I'm not opposed to doing sequels. It's just, again, it's just got to fit. And one thing when I told you I did a book club presentation about the Healing Tree, and I asked the readers, what do you think about a sequel? And well, is this something that you would like to see another book? And readers, I love getting that kind of feedback from readers, and that's why I use beta readers, because I like to get feedback from readers. Real readers and people that read a lot. What is it that you liked about this book or didn't like about this book or this character? And when I asked them about the Healing Tree, I got some interesting, and I'm sharing inside information with you here, but I asked them about a sequel to the Healing Tree. And I asked them about the protagonist in the Healing Tree. And you know what feedback I got? It was almost unanimous. I was surprised. They didn't really want to see a sequel featuring the protagonist in the Healing Tree. They wanted to see a sequel that featured the Cherokee couple, Atoe and Jula, the Cherokee. They wanted to see a sequel. And somebody suggested in the book club meeting, they said, well, what about doing a prequel to the Healing Tree where you talk about, Jula and Atoe and how they met up with the protagonist, before the Healing Tree. And that thought had never occurred to me. So, but that's kind of one of those folders that I mentioned. I have a folder on a sequel to the Healing Tree, somehow, weaving in their story, and maybe it's a prequel. I don't know, but that's the kind of feedback that I love to get in talking to readers.
I like that you do engage your readers and getting some, direction. I think that's great. Now, Todd has brought up a fascinating question. And Todd, I'm really glad you brought this up because it crossed my mind when I was reading the synopsis of the book. And he says, he was shocked at the accuracy and similarities between the cure and COVID. Freaking scary how close it was to the real thing 2 to 3 years before the real thing. Maybe you have Tyler Dome psychic powers. That might be an inside joke, the Tyler Dome.
It is. That's the inside. That's a great, and I've gotten that comment from other readers, and I would like to say it was due to my brilliant research and uncanny knack figuring out what readers want. And as Todd pointed, Tyler Dome, we both lived on a street called Tyler Drive. And of course, back then, the sports, we played football, baseball, everything out in the street. And we referred to it jokingly as the Tyler Dome, where we did our activity. So that's where the Tyler Dome came from. And I wish I could take credit for all of that, but that was just pure blind luck. I had this idea. There's an old book. I don't know if any of you remember this. I can't even remember the author name. I read it and when I was in high school, called The Satan Bug. And it's about a pandemic bug, like a COVID or whatever. And I don't even have that book on my bookshelf. I don't even, like I said, don't remember who wrote it, but that book was about a worldwide pandemic and how it started. And for some reason, something triggered that in me is writing that. And that was the theme of the cure. And it fit with, as you can tell, I'm not a fan of big pharma, as a lot of people are not. And it occurred to me that to develop a blockbuster drug takes on the order of $1 billion of investment. It's a huge investment to develop a blockbuster drug. And the idea struck me. It's like, okay, if I'm a pharmaceutical company, I spent $1 billion or more to develop a vaccine, and then it doesn't get approved. Well, that's $1 billion down the tube. And so the creative, nefarious part of me says, well, what if you developed the virus that you only had the cure for it? And that's where that came from, because I can see, again, does that happen? I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised. And it just was totally blind luck that it happened a few years before COVID. And again, I'm glad that I'm not glad that COVID happened, obviously, but I'm glad that. And I've heard that on my other themes and other books, is that, people have told me that you seem to have a knack for predicting, anticipating things happening. And it's like, again, some of it is just, I know and understand healthcare and how healthcare works probably too well. And some of that is just seeing these things, and it's just, it's like the abuses in the mental health system. I mean, I saw that firsthand. The company I worked for at the time had a lot of drug treatment programs, and I will tell you, and I can say this because they're no longer in business, but they had their whole deal was, if you admitted somebody and your insurance plan covered 30 days of treatment, you ended up with a 30-day treatment plan. If your insurance covered a 90-day treatment plan, you mysteriously ended up with a 90-day. That's factual. That happened. I saw that in the company I worked with. That really has, so it's not an extension to take it to the my novel on the treatment plan. So I've seen so many things like that in working in healthcare for 28 years that that just stick in my mind, are wrong, and people need to be made aware of it in my thinking.
Well, I'm glad that you have taken up this sword, and that, as you said, you might know too much about healthcare, but I'm glad you do, because it has led you down this path where you are writing very interesting stories that, as you said, they're educating us. And so I think it's wonderful. And believe it or not, we're getting close to the end of our time already. Before we go there, I don't know if this was Lance or Charlie, maybe Lance, because he nodded when you mentioned the Satan bug. And so he has given us some information. The Satan bug, Alistair MacLean, writing as Ian Stewart, published in 1962. The movie in 1965 starred Richard Maharis, Richard Basehart, and Francis and Dana Andrews. And I think I know everyone will be watching it tonight. And that it
Well,
was,
thank you for looking.
sure.
I love that, because I did not remember a movie being made of it, but I remember the book, and I couldn't have given you the author's name, so I will have to. I need to find a copy of that somewhere. If you can help me find a copy, I'd love to have a copy on my bookshelf. Seriously, because that book stuck in my mind over all these years. The theme of it, again, I couldn't tell you about anything about the characters or. But that theme stuck in my head all these years. So now I'm going to be on a mission to find a copy of it somewhere.
I was a big Alistair MacLean fan, and of course, when that book came out, I didn't know who Ian Stewart was, but I knew Alistair MacLean, and I saw the movie in the theater, and it was really good. Of course,
I'll have to look for the movie as well.
Well, that's what he said. He goes, everyone's going to be looking for it, watching it tonight. Just out of curiosity, I wonder why he wrote as Ian Stewart. I wonder if he changed his name because he thought it might be a controversial topic, and so he was separating himself.
I think it was because it was sort of a different genre than he was writing thrillers. His whole career was thrillers, and this was more of a science fiction.
I see. Well, makes sense. And that's one of the things that fascinates me about learning more about authors, which is why we have this program, so that we can learn about people. Jeff has a question. Jeff, unmute.
Okay, so Darryl, I was going through your website before we started, and there's a lot there, and I was kind of trying to pick your latest book. And is it Treatment Plan? Is that your latest?
Correct, yes.
Okay. So I read Michael Crichton's Coma, and I'm reading another medical thriller now that seems to be going along the same line. So Treatment Plan, can you give me a synopsis? I know we hate hearing that word, but basically, what is the premise for it? So I think that's probably where I want to start if I'm going to read one of your books.
Well, the premise is I think very simple. It is, again, people are profiting off of treating addiction in
Addiction,
a way
right.
that is, yeah, the whole addiction aspect of it. And again, it's that Delray Beach. You're not picking on Delray Beach. Delray Beach is a lovely, lovely town, but that area for so long, and still is to an extent, was kind of the epicenter for treatment plan abuses. And I actually went down there and talked to people and got a feel for it. And it sounds horrific that people, like I say, would literally dump somebody on the street who has addiction issues when they or their family can no longer afford to pay. And that just, and that's the nut of it. And they prey on Midwestern families in Florida. Florida has been way behind the curve on regulating and treatment facilities. And at the time, I don't know if it's still true, probably, that you could open up a I refer to as a halfway house concept. You could open up a halfway house. All you need is a business license. There was no oversight. There was no licensing requirements for it. There was, any of us could open up and these people would join up with licensed treatment facilities and also with drug dealers to recycle people. And that's where the whole rinse and repeat which Linda Whitaker, by the way, came up with that term when she was one of my beta readers for a treatment plan. And she came up with that term, and I loved it, and I've used it in my advertising for that book, is rinse and repeat. And again, it's, there's no, they're just recycling patients and again, just, going through money. So that, that's the nut of it, Jeff, and I appreciate the question.
Right.
And
Thanks.
it's something, again, near and dear to me, having worked for a company that did that. I'm embarrassed to admit, and that did that and made a lot of profit off of other people's misfortune. And I think that's so wrong. It's, to me.
Thank you.
Well, we're glad. Charlie, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have an insight. My first wife was a nurse, and at one juncture, she worked for a guy that owned several nursing homes. This goes back to Florida. I lived in Clearwater, and
Okay.
I felt the same thing was going on there back in the day. This was in the 60s. They were keeping people alive by any means necessary to keep collecting. She just had to quit because it became so horrendous morally to see that go on. So there's another one for you, and I'm sure it's still going on.
Well, funny, that was a great segue, and this was totally unplanned. The book I'm working on, the working title is called Code Blue, and it is written about exactly that, elder care abuse. And the premise of this story is the Warren Thompson, from the Care Card, his mother is in a retirement community, a fictitious retirement community in Asheville, and she mysteriously dies. And it's about all of the same themes you've talked about. And you're exactly right. It does happen in nursing homes as well. And so that's the theme of the book I'm working on now, is exactly that. So stay tuned.
Great, thank you.
And Todd mentioned that his youngest daughter works at a facility exactly like that for kids with the drug and the mental health problems. So you are definitely, again, we know your background, so we know that you do know you know what you're talking about, but also to have this type of confirmation that it you know that unfortunately what you write of is true. And so we're grateful for you for finding a way to educate us, an entertaining way where we're learning something along the way, and we're also obviously falling in love with some of your characters because we want you to bring them
Great.
back again. So before we go, I just want to let everybody know very quickly, we have a monthly, Sisters in Crime Atlanta has a monthly readers program here on Zoom. It is the first Saturday of the month. You can get the information off of our website. I included that in the chat. And it's called Murder by the Book. And what we do, it's a gathering of readers, and we share what we've read recently and what we like about it. And so we would like Darryl to participate in that with us now and tell us something that he has read either recently or in the past, and let us know if he recommends it or not, so that we can continue to grow our to be read piles.
Well, fortunately, you gave me 5 minutes notice on this. This is the book I'm reading now, called Guest on Earth, if you can see that, by Lee Smith. And it's a fascinating book. It is, the theme of it is, I call it a fictionalized account of Zelda Fitzgerald. As most of you know, she had some very serious mental health problems, and she was in they called them insane asylums at the time. She was had been admitted to, among other places, an insane asylum in Asheville, North Carolina, right down the road from me. And this is a fictionalized account of somebody who was also a patient in this asylum, and had firsthand experience with Zelda Fitzgerald. And for those of you that don't know, she actually died in a fire. They had a fire at the insane asylum there in Asheville. It's no longer, the building's not, is no longer standing. But her husband, F. Scotty would stay at the Grove Park Inn when he would come visit, and he spent a lot of time. They had their own suite. If you ever go to the Grove Park Inn, you can go up to, I think it's the second floor, and there's a suite with a plaque on it that's the F. Scott Fitzgerald suite, where he would stay because he made very frequent trips to visit with her and stay with her. And she perished in the fire. They had a horrific fire in the facility, and I want to say like 20 people perished in the fire, and Zelda Fitzgerald was one of the people that perished in it. So this is a fictionalized account, but very well done, and the writer Lee Smith did a really good job of researching the facts on it. So it's very, her account of the facility and Zelda Fitzgerald and what went on at the place, and the administrator and the people that worked there. It was very, very accurate from what I've read about it. And so just a fascinating read. And if you're a Scott Fitzgerald fan and interested in a little Asheville history, and the Grove Park Inn, which is a lovely, lovely place. It's a fascinating read, and that's my current read, and highly, highly recommend it.
Zelda was from Montgomery, Alabama.
Yes, she was. Yep.
That's real Southern gal. And one of the museums down there,
Yeah.
museums, has a collection of her poems and writings and what have you. It's fascinating. It's just.
I would love to see that sometime. Thanks for bringing it. I didn't know that. I mean, I knew she was from Montgomery, but I would love to visit that sometime when I'm in that direction. Because I just, like I say, I'm a huge F. Scott Fitzgerald fan, and just the whole story is their time in Asheville was kind of fascinating to me.
Well,
A couple of other authors
Mhm.
I'll plug quickly that I talked to Dawn about. Ron Rash, which a lot of you probably heard of Ron Rash. He's a great local author. He's also, I think he's still teaching at Western North Carolina. And just a very nice person. I've met him a couple of times at events here in Waynesville, and just super down to earth, good old North Carolina boy. But he writes from the heart, and good stories. And another writer, David Joy, who is also North Carolina. His works, I will not warn you, but his books are very and topics are very intense. It's not, not really feel good kind of books, but very intense and very emotional kind of stories that he writes. But again, a very, very gifted writer from these parts, and I highly recommend both of them. So, and Linda Whitaker, our friend that we talked about earlier, who lives in Hendersonville now, and Linda and I are good friends, and she writes techno thrillers, I think is how she calls them, and good books. She's been fortunate enough to read for her on some of hers, and vice versa. She's read some of mine, and I highly recommend her books as well. So.
Well, once again, thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate. Oh, go ahead, Todd.
I just wanted to say personally to Darryl, Glenn and Cindy were just, I live in the suburb of Phoenix now. I moved from Macon in '76, so it's been quite a while. But Darryl's brother Glenn and I have been friends since we were like literally 5 years old. So probably 62 years. And they were just out here, and we get together frequently when they come out for Cindy's dad. So, and we also have other authors from Macon, Otis Scarborough, which good friend of Darryl's. So,
Oh,
just a shout out. It's really good to see you again, Darryl.
and I love the Georgia
Good to see you
connection.
too, Todd.
I love the Georgia connection here, and unexpected Georgia connection, I must say, because I know you of writing in the Carolinas and South Florida. And so I know I keep saying we're going to wrap it up. So one last question. Any chance you're going to, and I found out in our pre-conversation that you used to live in Atlanta. So any chance you're going to bring something to Georgia for us?
You never know where it's going to go. I mean, I just it very well could be, but right now focused on North Carolina. Like I say, the next book. Well, actually, Warren Thompson in this next book I'm working on. I was kind of torn between going back to South Florida or North Carolina, because obviously I have connections to both, and so what I've done is the Code Blue, the one I'm working on now, straddles both. Warren Thompson still lives in Fort Myers, but his mother lived in the Asheville area, and so it takes place partially in this area because he has a house now in the mountains that when his mother was up here. And so it takes place in both North Carolina and South Florida. So, Georgia definitely could be, like I say, having lived in Atlanta and grown up in Macon, Georgia could figure into the equation at some point with a story. So, yeah.
All
Have
right.
him drive because you have to go through Georgia to get to Florida from North Carolina.
This is true. This is true. And still the best barbecue around is in
Oh,
Georgia.
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah.
for sure. For sure. And speaking of Macon, what is that barbecue Oh, my
Ventures?
husband, fresh air?
Ventures?
Oh,
Fresh air is
yeah, I was
my,
gonna say fresh
yeah,
air.
my brother and I have this argument. We argue about fresh air versus Finchers.
Oh, good
And
to
he's a
know.
big Finchers fan, and I'm a big fresh air fan.
Uh-huh.
But both of them are, I mean, it's hard to decide between the two of them. And we
Mhm.
just, but that's kind of an ongoing battle that we have.
Well, I love it, and you
What's
have,
that one down on 16 at Metter, Swits?
I don't know
Is
that one.
So was it Swits Barbecue out halfway to Savannah on 16? Metter, somewhere
Well,
along.
Yep, I'm, yep, familiar with that. Yeah, yeah.
Well, they did take Ventures to outer space.
Oh, wow. That's
They
kind
took
of
it,
hard
they
to
took it
beat
on a space
there.
trip.
There you go.
That's kind of hard to
The
beat there.
pink pig, I see Jeff putting up the pink pig. So where's that? Jeff?
Is it in the mountains? Jeff, quit muting.
You're still muted. There you go.
It's such a pain in the butt to get to up there, but Pink Pig is in Cherry Log, just south of Blue Ridge, in between me and Blue Ridge. It's
Oh.
really great,
Okay.
long time
Well,
barbecue.
that's my brother.
Jimmy Carter used
Yeah,
to
my brother lives
be a
in Blue
big
Ridge,
fan of.
so I'll have to ask him about the.
Well,
Well, gentlemen, I have enjoyed this. Hi, Linda. Not to exclude you. Linda is our friend from Kenya who joins us on these reader
Kenya.
reader
Wow.
events. But
Yeah.
thank you
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and especially, well, Todd and Linda, your time zone is different from ours. So appreciate you guys tuning in, and I hope to see you again. Darryl, best of luck to you. I'm very much looking forward to reading. I don't even know where to start. I'm kind of like, should I start with the cure? Should I start with the treatment plan or the healing tree? They all sound so fascinating. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time and look forward to reading your books. And I hope to see you guys again sometime, either on Zoom, joining us, Sisters in Atlanta in some capacity, or maybe out at a writers conference or something. I think that would be great.
Thank
Thanks
you for
again.
presenting this.
Well, thank you again. I appreciate it, and I've enjoyed it. And always, you email me or whatever if you have questions or comments. I always appreciate feedback. But thank you everybody, and Dawn, thank you for having me. And I enjoyed it, and I hope to see all of you soon.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Charlie, you need to do the
Yeah.
stop the recording. Yeah. Okay.
Uh,
All right.
I'll see y'all.
All
Thank you.
right.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Bye.
What do I
Bye.
do? Dawn, what do I do to do that?
Somewhere it says stop recording.
Well, I can't see it. Let's see. Wait a minute.
I don't know. Let's
Oh,
see.
yeah, I got it.
You got it? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, Charlie.